Hi people, it's Archivist here, and today I'm going to be reviewing yet another Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled track, and that is Hot Air Skyway. And the footage you're seeing is me playing against Oxide's Ghost, and if you're trying to go for the Platinum Trophy in CTR, then you do actually have to beat Oxide on every single track in the game, which means that this might be of some use for you as well, because you'll be able to see the technique I used to beat Nitrous Oxide. So the way to look at this track, I find, is in two parts. There's the run up and then there's the jump. So the first part of the track has you drifting quite easily around a nice tight area before you come up against this blue flame jump. Now when you get to this blue flame jump, the name of the game is Control, because you're going incredibly fast around a relatively narrow track while trying to avoid flying off or also braking too hard so you lose your blue flame. But if you manage to hold on to this blue flame all the way across this narrow portion of the track, then you'll get to this shortcut where at normal speed it's quite difficult, but if you're going very fast you can jump up, air brake and just fly over the thing. It's very convenient and a massive advantage in terms of getting the best time. Then what you'll see me do in the footage is something a little bit controversial, where I decide to just brake when I start my next lap, because I felt that if I was continuing to use my blue flame I would tend to lose it on that descending spiral, meaning that I wasn't building up the reserves necessary to then again come at that shortcut and jump over it. Because in my mind the most important thing to nailing this track and beating Oxide was having enough blue flame energy to be able to get myself over that final shortcut. And indeed, I think on all 3 laps in this I engineered it so that I wasn't taking too many risks so that I could maintain my blue flame and execute that shortcut each time. And if you manage to do that, that really is the secret to beating Oxide. And you'll see that if you do that from the footage again, that it's not even a close race at that point. It's very, very easy, in fact, once you've mastered that. So the thing is, on this first bit, as we're on the final lap now here, it's just about getting as many perfect boosts as you can. There aren't too many risks you have to take here. Just make sure that you are consistently hitting that gauge, because you want to get as many reserves as possible to do this, to get your blue flame and then continually manage it around this much harder portion of the course, because it's much tighter but also you're going much faster. And in order to get around some of the corners you're going to have to hop continuously to avoid flying off the side. And you'll notice there is a turbo pad that I just hit there, and the thing is, I found that if you're maintaining your control sufficiently, you don't have to hit it to beat Oxide by any means, but if you can, well, it's just another safety net for maintaining your blue flame. And then as we come up to the very end here, well, I had enough blue flame to send myself over the corner and beat Oxide. And so now I'm going to go back and take a look at some of the areas of the track where I made a few decisions that you may be wondering about, or just thinking, how do I do that myself? So I'll start off just by focusing on the very beginning of the track. And yet again, I did want to highlight the fact that on these initial turns it's very easy to maintain control. So the most important thing to do here is to make sure that you're hitting a perfect boost gauge as much as you can. The reason for this quite simply being because you're building up your reserves here. And if you're not aware of the reserve system, I suppose the best way to say this is the better you boost, the longer you can go once those boosts have stopped. So once you've got your blue flame, it means that if you have enough reserves, you can keep your blue flame for much longer, which is why it's so important at this stage to be building up your reserves correctly. It's not enough just to be able to race around this area efficiently. If you can hit the turbo as well before the jump, that's quite useful, because that just adds to your reserves. Another thing I did, which maybe isn't necessarily the optimal choice, but I found it to be the reliable choice, is not to take the shortcut on the right as I do the first major turbo jump, because I found that with that, although I could get it to work most of the time, in fact most people online do just default to it because it's not that hard, it was unreliable enough in that sometimes I would clip the edge and it would negate all of my reserves, which was frustrating. And I didn't find that in taking the alternative route that I lost much speed, and I also found that I could get more reserves straight away by taking that longer route. So it's not necessarily the optimal decision, but I did find it to be a safe move in a track which is filled with lots of areas you have to take risks. I find that the first really challenging part of this race is where you come up to this corner here. So you've got your blue flame at this point, and it's very easy just to throw yourself off the edge. In fact, even if you don't have blue flame, it can be quite easy to throw yourself off the edge. So here, the best thing I can say, a bit of advice, is just to come at it at a really sharp angle if you can, and then start hopping. You'll see every time I start hopping. And this is the point where you need to have had those reserves, because you can't necessarily be boosting here immediately. You need to be hopping up and down, and also air braking if you can, which for the PlayStation 4, that means hopping and then holding square very, very briefly so you can do a slightly sharper turn in the air. And that means you can maintain your speed and not fly off the edge. And then there's a similar corner coming up just around here. And this is where there is a turbo pad. I found that it was more important that I rely on just keeping on the track. So if I could get it as a luxury, that's quite nice. But I found that whether or not I hit it, I would be maintaining my boost anyway, so it was sort of like a nice to have. But on the straightaway, if you can, try and get a bit more boost as well, although I didn't find it to be completely necessary just because you cover the ground so quickly with blue flame. But then the absolute most integral parts of this whole thing, this is why you want the blue flame above just going quickly, is this bit at the end here. Now, if you're just going at regular speed, you sort of have to awkwardly brake around the side, and it's just not very fun feeling. It's a momentum killer. But with blue flame, you can do a hop at this little lip here, and then you can air brake, which means holding down square or whatever your controller demands, and then you can do an incredibly sharp turn in the air, and then when you hit the ground, you will get your blue flame to just shoot you forward straight away. But then is where I make my second, probably very controversial decision if you're watching this, is that once I go past the lap line, I decide to actually get rid of my blue flame. The reason I do this is because if I maintain it, I can quite easily get to that spiral later on, but the moment I get to that spiral, I would find that it was just too hard, at least with Crash, to maintain my turning and not bump the corners. If I bumped the corners, I would lose my blue flame, which means I don't have any reserves left. So when I reinitiate the blue flame, I am not prepared for the rest of the track, meaning that I can't really guarantee I'll get that shortcut at the end. Now, I'm sure there are some better players than me out there that can actually get the blue flame and just keep going around that spiral, but for me, it was one of those areas where I decided I don't feel confident I can continue to maintain this level of speed around the rest of the track, and indeed I don't have to if I want to beat Oxide. So it's my next level, I guess. If I can maintain my speed around the spiral, great, but I decided to kill my speed at the beginning of the lap line so that it meant that I could then continue to safely build up my reserves again and then rinse and repeat. Of course, when you go for your final lap and you go over that line, the finish line, it means you can just shoot through with your blue flame because there's no need to worry about later stages. And that, in a nutshell, was my approach to defeating Oxide on Hot Air Skyway. Hopefully this was of some use. Of course, if you're also having trouble with the Pinstripe boss where he's throwing bombs behind him all the time, which is incredibly annoying, you can just use this tactic as well. Just make sure that you get ahead of him and then take this approach, and you will stay ahead of him, so it's also useful there. Now I'm going to just let the time trial play without me commentating over it in case you just want to watch it raw basically. As always people, thanks very much for watching and see you next time.